Hello everyone, I'm Jay Joshi and welcome to the 30th episode of Learning Java. Today, we'll be learning some more topics about objects and functions. So first of all, we'll be learning about how we can call functions from other classes, static and non-static functions from other classes. So over here, I have a class draw and I have a function in this class called drawLine, a static function called drawLine, which draws a line. So if I want to call this function from another class, so I have a class called main class. So this is useful if you want to reduce the amount of content in your code, or you want to reuse some functions. So let's say this drawLine functions I want to use, because this drawLine function is very useful if you just want to draw a line. You don't want to write the code again and again. So I can just use this function whenever I'm writing some other type of code in my current code. So if I want to use this drawLine function, I even said this in my previous video. So what you have to do is, since it's a static function, you can't use objects. So you have to use the name of the class to access that particular function. So the name of the class is draw and the name of the function is drawLine. So let's say this function, so first we have to go in public static void main. So public static void main, and over here we'll write our code. So if this drawLine code was in this main class only, then we would have just written drawLine, because that's the name of the function. But since this function is in another class called draw, we can do something like draw.drawLine. So we are accessing the function using the class name. So if I execute this main, it'll call the function. So you can see right now over here that this has drawn a line also in my thing. Usually it doesn't draw a line. Why is this drawn a line? Because this function draw is being accessed in the main class. So these two classes are basically linked. That's why it's drawing a line. So that's how you know you have done it correctly. So I'm calling the draw function, this draw function, using the class name draw.drawLine, because that's the name of the function. So this way you can call the same function from different classes. It's very useful. Now, let's say this function was a non-static function. Let's say this was public void drawLine. Okay, it's a non-static function. So we have to call this function using an object. So we have to create an object over here. So we can't do this. I'll remove this. So first we have to create an object. Now, if I create an object of this class, the main class, if I do something like main class obj1 is equal to new main class, and assuming it's a default constructor, and if I do something like main class dot draw line, this will not work. Why will this not work? Because this drawLine function doesn't actually exist in main class. So you have to create an object in this main class using the class in which the function actually is. So this function, drawLine function, the non-static drawLine function, is in the class draw. So you have to create an object for the draw class in our main class. So if I do something like this, and then my bad, this should have been obj1 in the first place. So obj1, then this code will work. So you can see again the same line is there, because we are accessing the drawLine function from the draw class in the main class. So this is how you can access different functions from other classes in some other class. So this is how Java is a very useful programming language. So basically, if I write a code if I write a function in some other program, I'm going to use that in some other program. Instead of writing that code again, you can just reuse your programs. So this is a very useful feature. Now we know how we can call different functions from different classes. Now let's say I create an object, right? So this is public static void main. Let me do Control Z. So if I have something like this, right? So main class, my bad, this should have been there, a new main class. And I have a function over here, a non-static function. So let's have a function like public void, and let's say the name of this function is something like hello, right? So this is the name of the function. And in this function, let's say this performs some random function, let's say anything, some array related function or anything like that. But what we want to do is we want to call, so to make you understand this better, Think of it this way. Think of the advantage of object-oriented programming. As I said, the advantage of object-oriented programming is basically using different values for the same variables using different objects, right? So if I have a default constructor over here, we can have something like this. So I can have a default constructor over here. So first main class, and then this constructor can probably do something, and then I can have some probably some variables over here. So I can have a variable, let's say int a, and then I can have an int b. Now I'm assigning, if it's a default constructor, let's say I assign this the value 10 and this the value 12. So if I initialize this obj1, in obj1 the values of a and b will be 10 and 12. Let's have another thing in which it's int x comma int y, and we have something like this: a is equal to x and b is equal to y. Again, this can be a and b, then you have to use this variable. So these are the two constructors I have. This is a default constructor and this is a parameterized constructor. And then I make another object. So obj2 is equal to new main class, and this has parameters. So let's say I give this the value 6 and 8. So in obj2 the values of a and b is 6 and 8, and in obj1 the values of a and b is 10 and 12. This is pretty basic. Now let's say I want to use all of these values in a function, in the function hello. Now in this function hello, I want to use three objects basically. So I want to use one object as the calling object, one object as a parameter object, and one object as a returning object. So I'm going to repeat that: one as a return object, so I'm going to return an object, one as a parameter object, so one object I'm going to have as a parameter, and one object I'm going to use as a calling object. So let's say I use obj1 as my calling object. So I have something like this, right? So this obj1 is my calling object, and as the parameter object I have obj2. Pretty basic. So over here as well I need to have a parameter, so I can have, so over here, so now this is a new thing. If you want to have an object parameter, we can have something like this, obj3 over here. So no, we can just put obj2, it really doesn't matter, the parameters can have the same name. So this is the calling object, this is the parameter object, and over here again is the parameter object. Now I want to return an object, another object, which I'll create in this. So in this function, I'm going to create an object main class obj3 is equal to obj3 is equal to new obj is equal to new main class, and then I'm going to give this value something like probably 14 and 16. So this is going to go to this particular parameterized constructor, and obj3 is going to have the values 14 and 16. Now I want to return this object. So since I want to return an object, my return type has to be that, right? So how will I return this object? I can choose to return obj3. Now what is my return type going to be? So if I want to return an object, the return type is going to be the name of the class. So like how, let's say I declare an integer, it's int a, int b, or double something, double d, or float f, something like that. So we are declaring it like that. So if I want to return an integer, it would have been something like int, or for double it'll be double, or char it'll be char. So if I want to return an object, we initialize an object using the class name. So over here the return type will be main class. Now the compiler knows that since the class name is the return type, we are returning an object. So this is how you specify that you want to return an object. The return type is the name of the class. So if the return type is the name of the class, then we are returning an object. So now you can see obj1 is our calling object, obj2 is our parameter object, and we are creating another obj3 inside this, which we are returning. So how do we access the values of all three variables? So first of all, since I'm using obj1 to call the function hello, if I just use the variable a, let's say for some function a is equal to a into a, what value of a will be used? Will the value be 10? Will the value be 6? Or will the value be 14? So by default in Java, if you're just using a variable or anything, any function of which is related to that particular object, so in this case, all these obj1, obj2, and obj3 are related to the variable a, what value will be used? So by default in Java, the default value of a will be the value of the calling object. So since we are calling this hello function with obj1, the value of a will be the value of a in obj1. So the value of a is 10. Fine, that's clear. Now, what do I do if I want to access the value of the parameter object? It seems pretty basic. So if you want to access the value of the parameter obj object, so you can do obj2.a, since the name of the parameter is obj2. So this is how it is. So all these variables a will now have the value 6 because that's the value of obj2a. So obj2.a. This is how I'm accessing the value of the parameter thing. And let's say if I want to access the values of this obj3, then I can just do obj3 over here. It's pretty basic. And again, if it's obj3, this has to be after the declaration. So this needs to be somewhere over here, and this will work fine. So by default, if you just call a variable, the value of the variable will be that of the calling object. Otherwise, if you want it to be the parameter or the return type object, then you have to specify it. And one important note is that if I try to use obj1 over here, this will throw an error because obj1 cannot actually be accessed from this function. So you just leave it as it is, right? So if nothing's there, it's obviously the calling object. So this is how you can use objects as return type, parameters, and the calling object. It's very useful in different programs. So you can see how we are using only one variable, but we are accessing 3 different values. So this is a very useful thing. So that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you have any queries or suggestions, you can mail me. My email will be in the description down below. And thanks again for watching.